started, I want to introduce y'all to our first presenter here, Chris Allen, and she's with Belt Conveyor Guarding. And so I'm going to turn it over to her, and we'll see what we can learn today.
Thank you. As he'd mentioned, my name's Chris Allen, and I'm the sales coordinator for Belt Conveyor Guarding and our sister division, Reguarding Solutions. And our company has been keeping families coming home to each other for over 25 years. If you can make sure, I've given out a brochure, a workshop handout, which is basically overall the presentation, and a wedge clamp sample, which is one of these, which I'll go through later on, and also a safety gauge, which is one of these. If someone doesn't have one, I think there's a couple of extras over there, and at the end, anyone can take those extras. Now, I did have a problem with, just to let you know, I've got short videos in this which aren't working. So I'll just kind of speak through the videos. This Guard in a Safe Workplace workshop is going to consist of 4 modules. And it will take you through the process of learning to recognize machine guarding safety concerns. And how to fix them, basically. Now, there may be some images of graphic nature, so you can use your brochure to cover your eyes if you need to. We can become complacent in the way things are because that's how it's always been, or it's fine, I'm the only one who uses it. The time a danger is recognized may be too late. So let's get educated. First of all, for those who are not familiar with the term fixed guarding, it refers to guarding that's a physical barrier between a worker and a danger zone. Okay, wasn't working. There are other types of guarding, but fixed guarding prevents any contact unless it's purposely desired. A conveyor or rotating equipment will continue to move even after an emergency stop is activated. And then someone can still get pulled in. And then there'll be maybe one less seat at your dinner table from that point on. One thing we don't talk about is how quickly accidents happen. Time is a factor that's not taken into consideration, and we're not aware of how long things really take or what can happen in a period of time. So speed is very hard to judge. I'm sure that you've heard of these things. It happened so fast, I didn't see it coming. Following proper guarding practices and the proper guidelines takes the guesswork out of knowing whether it's safe or not. And don't become complacent in what's around you. There may be unseen hazards that if a proper assessment's conducted, you might find. And if they're not there, it could give you a false sense of security if guarding maybe is in place but it's not compliant. So, if a vehicle is traveling at 60 miles an hour, how far will it travel in 1 second? It's 5,280 feet in a mile. So you divide that by 60 seconds, and it travels 88 feet per second. An exhaust fan rotates at 1,200 revolutions per minute. So, as you can see, 1,200 divided by the 60 is 20 per second. We must protect everyone from the pinch points. Pinch points sound very cute. The doctors say it to us, it's going to pinch a little bit. But you've got to remember, injuries and dismemberment and fatalities actually start with just a pinch. So in the in-running pinch point is the area where the belt and the roller make contact, where that hand is. If the belt's coming this way, you can see exactly where the pinch point is here. In a new roller and belt, the danger may be only in that in-running pinch point. But as parts wear, there could be other dangers that are present. The rollers and the rotating parts themselves may have sharp edges, holes, or other things that could catch or entangle a person or their clothing. So you have to keep a certain distance away from all pinch points in all directions. Does anyone know what that distance is? It's supposed to be 36 inches. The regulation states that you must be kept to a minimum of 36 inches from all rotating parts or pinch points. There's an acronym to help you remember what needs to be guarded. This is known as AUTO. So when you're guarding equipment, you must not be able to reach the hazard around, under, through, or over. And if you can, you need to guard it. This is just examples of that same acronym. So I think that's fairly straightforward. I don't think there'd be any questions at this point. Fastening systems. Through Module 2, we'll be looking at how to spot the problems that could be encountered. And this is one of the things is fastening systems. Bolts are often used to attach guarding to the frame, but quite often they can rust and need replacing. Wearing gloves also can make it difficult to manipulate them, and they can be dropped and lost. And then the person who's removing and replacing the guard has to decide, is he going to go back, replace the bolts, or is it just easier just to put it back with the 3 instead of 4? And that's where suddenly the guarding can become non-compliant. A more user-friendly fastening alternate is this wedge clamp. So everyone's got one of these. So what this does is this is bolted to the frame or the leg. The guarding will slide on and it slides into place like this. And then it's secured with a plastic tie wrap. So you can't take it off with your hands. It's attached with a lock washer and a nut. You would need a side cutter to cut that tie wrap to be able to remove the guard. So it makes it simpler to be able to maintain that piece of equipment, to remove and replace the guarding. The one thing that you do have to educate everyone though is that once that guarding is back on and you put it back into place, you have to replace that tie wrap to make it compliant again. Without that tie wrap, you're just being able to access it. You have to have that tool to be able to remove it. We also have another one, which is a locking wedge clamp, which has a set screw in it, and you would need an Allen key to lock or unlock it. So it's just another option. But we find this is very, very well liked for being able to maintain equipment. So now we're going to take a look at some of the areas that you'll find that need to be checked for guarding. As well, what creates the hazard, what's wrong with the guarding, or if it's missing, then how to gauge the effectiveness of your current guarding. These areas mentioned are only a broad example of items of areas that need to be guarded that we come across a lot. Some of them may or may not be really anything to do with the plant that you're in, but it's still rotating equipment. So these are some areas to take a look at. Each of them pose a different danger, as well as severity of the injury that if they were in contact with a person, a bad incident could occur. And each should be considered equally threatening and not be ignored because of your complacent thinking. This was a video of a tail pulley, but I'm going to skip by that one. This is an example of a pump that we had provided a guard for. You can also add signage to the guarding to allow people to know, to indicate the danger within it. This picture shows a V-belt drive with all rotating parts and pinch points exposed. A worker could easily be hurt working on or around this exposed equipment. Obviously, this one has danger written all over it. And this one is a properly guarded V-belt. So there are no exposed pinch points and all the rotating parts are covered. This follows the auto acronym. So as you can see, you can't go around, under, through, or over. No one else is able to hurt themselves as long as they follow the lockout, tagout procedures as well. So in this case, you also notice that the mesh is black. It's easier to inspect. It's a visual inspection with the black mesh as opposed to the yellow. I mean, which one looks safer to you? That's an obvious one. This shows a compliant coupling guard that was designed and manufactured by us. This one comes with an inspection door. This allows for easy access for inspection through the inspection door. And then if further work needs to be completed for maintenance, the top can be lifted off by cutting and removing those tie wraps on the wedge clamps and opening the wedge clamps and removing the guard using the handles. So it's also ergonomic. And of course, as I mentioned before, providing you use the correct lockout, tagout procedures. Idler rollers, they need to be protected from contact or potentially falling onto someone. As the previous speaker mentioned, you need to enclose guard any rotating parts that are below the 7 feet, which in this case, there are idler guards on these. The regulation states a pinch point guard is required if a return idler is less than 7 feet away from walking or working surfaces. And it will serve the purpose of catching the roller in case it was to fall, as well as protecting the workers from contact with the moving parts or the pinch points. And idler baskets are required for any return rollers that are above the 7 feet from the ground. Their primary duty is to catch the roller in case of failure and stop it from falling onto someone who may be walking below or driving below, that sort of thing. This photo on the left shows an unprotected flange bearing. And although this shaft may rotate slowly, if a worker was to get entangled, they could still obviously become injured. There's no stopping it. It's still going to continue to go round. So why take the chance? You have to guard it right and save a life. The photo on the right shows you a properly guarded flange bearing. And this one's designed in such a way to allow the greasing of the bearing without removing the guard. So you want to make it as easy for maintenance as possible. And there's the fitting with the guard around it. So what creates a hazard? One of the things that you have to make sure is, if you are guarding equipment, is don't make the guarding a hazard. Make sure it's free of burrs, sharp edges, and pinch points. And sometimes the guard that gets built to cover the dangers actually creates more of a danger or a different danger than what was there previously. Safety is not a trial and error project, and it needs to be handled in a responsible way that makes sure that all aspects of the protection of the workers are taken care of. So I'm sure some of you may have seen something like this somewhere around in their past. You've already learned what to look for to see what's missing, so this should be easy. In the left picture, it's apparent that you can see the return roller has no guarding. It's a pinch point that would need to have taken care of. But did you notice also in the guard below, there's mesh that's missing, there's a hole in it, and you can reach through it. And in the next picture, I don't know if you notice, first of all, that piece of mesh that's around the bottom, covering that shaft. You have sharp edges on the mesh, and the holes are too big. And a person could easily make contact with that piece of equipment. And then did you happen to miss the big hole up there that's guarding? The guarding's in place, but there's a big hole. Someone could reach in there and through and under. And that's where they do create a false sense of security. Someone would think there's a guard in place. There's no problem in there. I'm not going to get injured, and that's where someone's going to get injured. So here's a good example to show you areas that need to be addressed. Someone can reach around the guard in front, under the guard from the bottom, through the guard at the front because the mesh is too close to what's being guarded, and over the top. So this is the auto. Again, you just keep that in mind always when you're guarding equipment, because really it's regardless of how many inches regulations stay, even if it's past, if your guarding is within that regulation, if you can still reach, you've got to guard it. In this case, with this conveyor, because the conveyor is bent, where those rollers are, it creates pinch points. So they would have to be guarded. And as I said before, it has to be the 36 inches on either side of the pinch point. In this case, they are close together. So that whole section of conveyor would have to be guarded. Now, can anyone tell me what they see as a guarding concern here? Obviously, there's exposed sprockets and chains, rotating parts, there's rollers up there on the track, and I'm sure if you were there, you would find even more hazards. And hopefully, after today, you should never have to witness this. I mean, what's missing? How about it's rotating equipment? There should be a guard there, obviously. And this type of thing wouldn't happen. There's really no excuse. So how do you know that your current guarding is compliant? This is not a video. I will explain to you exactly of a safety gate in use. And this is a safety gate which everyone has. It's developed to be compact and easy to unfold. So what you do is you insert the tip through the guard and through the mesh. And if it contacts that rotating hazard, then your mesh is not compliant. Your mesh has to be either smaller opening or the guarding has to be further away. To make it compact and easily foldable, obviously we had to make it flat. But you have to see it as being round because it's supposed to represent your arm and your finger. So if you were to put it through guarding, you have to make sure it's through the narrowest point of the mesh. So if the mesh is like wider across and narrower from the top to the bottom, you have to make sure you put it through that narrow section to make it work as if it's round. And basically it's fairly straightforward. I don't think there's any questions regarding this. There's a table here that shows you, this is the ANSI B11. So this shows you the distance, where the guarding is, from the distance from the point of operation to the maximum width of the opening. So if it's 2.5 inches, for instance, to the guard, then that opening has to be less than or equal to 3/8 of an inch. And you know, if it's 1/2 inch away, it has to be less or equal to 1/4 inch, the size of the opening. So the further away the opening is allowed to be a little bit larger. There was actually a story that I heard where someone, this is going back to the force sense of security, someone had, there was guarding in place, there was a fan behind it, and someone had put their hand, they were testing, they were maintaining, and they were testing for the heat and coming through and the vibration, and he put his hands against the guard, and his fingers got sucked in to the mesh, through the mesh, and his fingers got chopped off, all of them. And I mean, that obviously was forced. He was a worker there. He thought that the guarding was compliant. He put his hand up, not realizing the mesh was too large. And that's how his fingers went through. And obviously it was too close to have that size of mesh. So it's very important to keep that in mind. So I don't know if there's any questions. So in Module 3, we're going to look at some guarding examples that show you non-compliant guarding and how it could be guarded with compliant guarding. Here, the picture on the right is an unguarded tail pulley with many exposed dangers. Well, there's guarding there, but it's not really guarded very well because you can reach through it, you can touch the tail pulley, there's a lot of pinch points there. It's quite evident to the untrained eye, as long as you keep that auto acronym. Constructing the barrier guard on the left not only solves all of the compliancy issues, but solves the maintenance headache as well. Proper guarding doesn't just protect the workers from hazards, but it should be ergonomically designed to reduce common injuries such as strains when lifting the guards as well. So it's a good idea to make guarding so that it's easily lifted and ergonomic. Handrails are fine for some applications, but only with a proper assessment from a trained person would you be sure. In this case, the picture on the left, a handrail definitely would not work. A barrier guard with a proper mesh and the correct height would be acceptable. As you can see, you can reach right in there. The handrail's too close and it's almost like you don't really even need it there, basically. So there may be special requirements that should be considered. For instance, lubrication. Grease lines that can be extended. Grease lines can be extended through guarding, for instance. Corrosive areas may require stainless steel body or hardware. You've got to take into consideration all of these different types of requirements for that piece of equipment before designing your guard to make sure it's the best guard for that piece of equipment. It also not only serves to create a protective barrier, but it needs to be made in such a way that it's easy to maintain that piece of equipment. And really, ultimately, it's to make sure that when it's maintained, that guarding is replaced properly. It also needs to be ergonomic for everyone who uses it, so that, in the past, years ago, big, heavy, cumbersome guards were used, and a lot of the time the guarding wasn't put back because it's too cumbersome, too heavy. They need more people or sometimes a crane to put it back, and then it's left unguarded. Whereas if you use your guarding make sure it's ergonomic, you know that it's within everyone's capabilities to be able to maintain with ease. The best place to start is talking to whoever's responsible with working with that piece of equipment. So you basically have to figure out their needs, the maintenance people, the people who are working, find out all their requirements, all their maintenance requirements, and then the design process can begin. You can incorporate almost any design aspects to make it easier while keeping it safe and compliant. So in this case, there's removable front panels, makes it easier to remove and replace, to access. The wedge clamps would be used to attach them to the frame. There's hinged tops and sides, which makes it easy to access. Plus, if there's space, sometimes there's a space, you're limited for space when you take the guarding off. Where do you put it? So in this case, you're kind of taking care of that as well, so that it just overall is easier to take care of. And there are mounting legs which provide a solid and adjustable base as well. So think of all those types of things that you would require when you're guarding a piece of equipment. Also, inspection doors. They're necessarily when you need to keep machinery running and still want to be able to inspect or access certain areas. So basically what it is you can retrofit. It's a two-piece design. You basically can retrofit them around existing guarding. So they go around on either side of the guarding. The hole is put through that guarding, it's bolted onto the guard, and then the door is basically covering that hole. And you would use a wedge clamp to close it in the same way as all the removing and replacing the guard with the tie wrap. So you need a tool to remove to be able to access that piece of equipment. But it makes it better than having a hole cut. And in fact, even if you had old guarding that has a hole cut in it, you could probably replace that. Right here, there's a hole cut in here, which obviously makes it non-compliant, which was once a compliant piece of guarding. So to make it compliant again, you just add the inspection door, because obviously someone needed to have access to that piece. And you can also have extensions, so that if you needed to access through the other side of that guard, around the access door you could put extensions to stop any other areas from being touched. So there's like lots of things that you can do to make it safer to be able to maintain equipment. This is an example of the extensions. And you can customize them to any application, so you can make them any size that you need. And you still got to remember, whether it's an inspection door, an access port, you still got to keep in mind the procedures that you have in place as far as a lockout, tag out, and whatever the procedures are for being able to maintain that piece of equipment. So whether you need occasional access using an access door or continuous frequent access through a port, there are all these possibilities that are available that you should consider. Couplings. This is how a coupling guard is constructed, how we construct it anyway. And it shows the ease of how the modular design can be disassembled for maintenance. So First of all, the inspection door. It adds better access to be able to maintain the coupling. It's sloped on the top, so that takes up less space, and also it means it's less likely that someone will step on it. It also has on the sides there, it has adjustable fill plates, and it has an adjustable bottom as well, and that slides to maximize the coverage over the coupling, because sometimes you see guarding that's not very flexible and it's on top of the coupling, and depending on where it is exactly been installed, there's a gap down one side or the other side, or you can stick your fingers in. This way, once it's installed, you can slide it open and it covers it as to the largest amount that it can cover. And also you can handles can be incorporated as well to make it easier for removing and replacing the guard. You may have a need for increased access at times when you are properly locked out, and hinge guarding, putting hinges on certain guards might allow easier access to the equipment for maintenance. So that's another thing that you can consider. Black mesh versus yellow mesh. For visual inspection, it's a known fact that black mesh, by many people, feel it's easier to see through. So that's an option you should consider. If it's something that just needs to be visually inspected a lot, paint the mesh black. And you consider Lexan doors for maximum visibility. And a well-designed guard shouldn't weigh more than 50 pounds. It shouldn't require more than one person to remove or replace it. And it's a good idea if you if you're designing guards, to put a weight label on the larger guards, because everyone who's maintaining or accessing the equipment, they know their capabilities for lifting. And if on the larger guards there's a weight label, then at least it allows them to know if they're comfortable with lifting that particular guard. Now, we do have other suggestions for accessories. Now, this video doesn't work either, so I do have actually examples of them. You can take a look at the end. One of them is, obviously, I've mentioned before, there's rubber-coated handles are a good idea to add to your guards. Just makes it easier, especially if it's a guard that maybe has to be removed and replaced often. It just makes it more ergonomic and easier for the maintenance. Also, guard hangers. If you have limited space, or basically if it's a hanger that hangs onto the side of the guard, it's bolted onto the guard, you can hang it onto a handrail, you could hang it onto another guard. It basically will allow you to have somewhere to put that piece of guard rather than putting it on the ground. Maybe you have a tripping hazard there. It just is a safer way of working. Also, guard seats. That's another thing that we actually just have started using, we've designed, and that's where normally you would put the guarding on with 4 wedge clamps or 4 bolts previously. What we do is we have guard seats at the bottom so that the guarding sits in them, and then they flip up and you only are using the 2 wedge clamps instead of 4. So it makes it easier to put that guarding back into place or for installing, and you're only using the 2 wedge clamps. And I do have those over there if anyone wants to see, an example of what they look like. I guess, are there any questions so far? So after everything I've just told you, this is just kind of a little example. What's right with this guard? So this shows you basically all overall ideas of what is correct with this guard. So for instance, number 1, that's what I just told you earlier. It has black mesh. there for easier visibility. The number 2, in that case, there is a cutout around the equipment there, so it makes it easier to install rather than have to retrofit when you get the guard or try and make it work. It just makes it easier. Also, number 3 is removable front panels. Makes it easier to access. There is extra mesh on the side for additional ventilation where number 4 is. And there's, on number 5, smaller mesh along the side to prevent access from the pinch points. So you can see the size of mesh from on the front compared to the side are different sizes. Obviously, the ones on the side are closer to that hazard. On 6 there's actually that's actually a plate there that is supposed to be it's a bracket for a speed sensor. So you can adapt whatever you require for that piece of equipment to your guarding. And there's wedge clamps for easy removal and replacing. And also down the bottom, number 8, it's mounted to the grated floor for easy installation and removal. So it's just other things to keep in mind overall when you are designing your guard. Then you've got to make sure, is the guard recognizable as a guard? You want to make sure your guards stand out with a color that's different from your equipment. You don't want it to blend in with your equipment. Standardize a color that means danger. So safety yellow is the most common color, but there are companies that have various colors for their guarding, and then everyone knows that that is a guard. And it's really important to make sure that you educate your workers. Do they recognize and respect that the equipment needs guarding? How to recognize the specific pinch points and rotating hazards in their workspace. If there's any changes to their workspace, make sure that everyone is aware of it so that they are not complacent and just think everything's just the same as it was always, and maybe there's been some change that has made it that they should be aware of. Also, is your old or existing equipment compliant to today's regulations? Regulations do change. You've got to make sure that you stay up with all the regulations. And how and under what circumstances can guards be safely removed, and when must the guards be replaced? And what should you do if a guard is damaged or missing, and who should they notify? It's very important that everyone knows who they should go to if there's a guarding that's been damaged or is missing. One second or less can change a life and the lives of many forever. And there's only one winner when an accident happens. 1 second of the wrong decision, 1 second. That's all it takes. The person who gets hurt or killed is not only the only one who's affected by an accident. A workplace injury can cause a ripple effect. And the people who get affected are the family and friends take on extra responsibilities. Colleagues have increased workload. Witnesses may develop post-traumatic stress disorder. Many workers who sustain or witness both minor or major injuries within weeks or months can suffer episodes of depression. Employers need to deal with rehiring, retraining, costly fines, citations, and workers' compensation, and insurance premiums are likely to rise. So, are there any other questions or anything? That's basically...
One thing, we're talking about the wedge clamps and all, and, a lot of times when I go through places, you see them where, they just want to put a little latch on them where they can just take them off easy, and I don't know if you want to explain that further, that you got to have some kind of means or tool to take
Yes,
them
you have to have... the regulation states that you have to have a tool to remove. So that's why the tie wrap is very, very important that that tie wrap be replaced. If the tie wrap is, when it's installed, the tie wrap has to be put through the center. So if you take a look at this, it actually goes straight through here, simply done. Pull it tight. You cannot take it off with your hands then. Then you need that tool to cut that tie wrap to be able to remove it. And tie wraps are not expensive to keep in stock. You could keep them by your equipment, and you just got to make sure that you educate everyone that once they've removed it, that they replace the tie wrap, put a new tie wrap on, and then it's compliant again. Without that tie wrap, it's not going to be compliant. Okay. I also have, on the back of the handouts, there's an evaluation sheet, if you don't mind completing that. I have pens if anyone needs pens. And we also, there's a box there that you can check if you would like to get our emails. We send out safety blasts every so often, and just safety information. And I've actually got examples here, if anyone wants to see them, of some of our Guard Smart safety blasts that we do send. So if you want to receive the emails, you're very welcome. And if you decide that you don't like them, there's a click. You can click here to unsubscribe. But at least you can take a look and see what type of information you'll be receiving. Thank you very much.